Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, with Couch Commentary. When I do Couch Commentary, I talk about something that's going on in the culture from a psychological perspective. And today, I want to talk a little bit about the new Netflix documentary about the serial killer, Aileen Wuornos. And the new documentary is called Aileen, Queen of the Serial Killers. A little bit of a sensationalized, salacious title, but that is just in keeping with so much of the writing and the media coverage about Aileen Wuornos in history. There has been so much covered about this woman's life and the murders that this woman committed. And a lot of it has been really sensationalized and really misogynistic too, in a lot of ways. One of the things that I think is worth noting is her sexuality. A lot of times it's been reported historically that she was a lesbian. She was often called in the media a man hater, but actually, it appears that she was bisexual. And this is in keeping with a lot of documentation on her. But going back to the title of the documentary, Queen of the Serial Killers, if I were to name this documentary, I would call it Aileen Psychologically Complex. And it's for this reason that I think it is especially interesting for people who are interested not just in psychology, but who are interested in abnormal psychology. This is really a lesson in abnormal psychology. So, in this video, I just want to make a few points. And one of the points that I want to start with is how many different complex factors there were at work in this woman's psychological makeup. Okay. So, to begin, there were reports that her father, whom she had no relationship with, he was really not in her life. He was imprisoned very early in her life. He was reportedly suffering from schizophrenia by some accounts. There is a very high genetic loading for schizophrenia. So that basically means that if a parent has schizophrenia, their offspring will be far more likely to have schizophrenia as well. It's not a one-to-one correspondence. So it doesn't mean that it is 100% if you have a schizophrenic parent that their child will be schizophrenic, but they are more likely. So that is sort of one factor to think about when you look at Aileen Wuornos. What was the mental health makeup of her parents? Did she have a biological predisposition for serious mental illness? That's one consideration. In addition, when we look at environmental factors for Aileen, we see that the environment was really, really compromised for her too. There was an incredible break in the environment that she experienced. When she was 4 years old, her mother apparently left her with a babysitter, she and her brother, and never returned. And it's reported that she told police that she just simply couldn't cope. Imagine, and actually, some people don't need to imagine because it happened to them. But if it didn't, imagine being 4 years old and your parent just poof disappears. Imagine what that does to one's sort of psychological expectations, psychological adjustment, sense of security and trust in the world. Years later, grandparents would actually adopt her, but there were allegations that her grandfather sexually abused her. One of the things that I think is really interesting to note is that she actually had a marriage very young. She was about 20 years old and she married a man, but not a man who was around her same age. She married a man who was in his late 60s. Late 60s. Imagine. I mean, that age difference is incredibly uncommon. And of course, what does it mean psychologically? There are reports that he shared that he actually was beaten by her, by his very, very, very young wife, beaten with his own cane. Aileen also reported that she had been assaulted in multiple ways by boys as a young person. And so you look at all these different factors that were at work potentially between 0 and 18, and what kind of emotional, psychological impact does that have on a person? Well, obviously, you don't need a psychologist to say that these factors can have a serious impact on a person. Now, does it mean that all these factors together cause a person to murder repeatedly? No, it doesn't, because there are other individuals who have similar histories and yet haven't necessarily committed murder. They draw the line, they will not engage in that kind of behavior. The next point that I want to make, I think that the director did such a good job in putting this whole documentary together and showing something that really exposes some of the psychological complexity with Aileen Wuornos. And that is, at times when she was talking, how much you might feel like you believed her. You believed what she was saying. There was an ability that she had. She could talk about her own experience. She could share her thoughts and feelings, or she could share what happened. And as she was doing it, I, as a viewer, at times could feel like you really believe her. You believe her. But what's important to note psychologically about that is, was that true? Or to what extent was that true? How genuine was that versus how much of a performance was it? So, as an example, I'm thinking first about her trial for Richard Mallory. This is her first known murder. And she was on trial and she spoke about some of the trauma that she suffered from him, some really horrific details that she shared in court about what he did to her. And as she shared this, and this is all shown in the documentary, the viewer, I feel, really probably believes her. It seems genuine. The look on her face, her affect, which is the outward expression of emotion, her affect really seems to match exactly the content of what she's saying, which makes a person prone to believing that person, which is why I, as a viewer, at times felt I could really believe her. Also, much later in time, and also later in the documentary, there is footage in the documentary of the post conviction hearing in July of 2001. And she talks in that hearing about the murders that she committed. And again, there, when she is talking, and she appears very different, her emotions appear very different in that hearing. And yet, when she's talking, and she talks with complete candor about what happened, again, you as a viewer may feel that you really believed her. You really believed what she was saying. You trusted that what she was saying was true to her. Some of the comments that she made in that post conviction hearing were really astonishing. She spoke with what appeared to be complete honesty about what happened, about how and why she committed those murders. Now, something to think about when we think about a person being able to come across as very believable is that that person also can possibly be very effective, very successful in conning others. Okay. Another point that I thought was so striking in this documentary, and again, the documentary did such a good job of really conveying, is the degree to which Aileen Wuornos was capable of having shifting emotions. She could shift emotions in a millisecond, apparently, and you could see it in the affect on her face. Her affect could shift so quickly from light to what appeared to be dark, from happy or maybe even euphoric to what appeared to be malicious or angry. She could shift so quickly. You could see it on her face. Her voice, her tone of voice would change. One must also wonder, did she feel this? What was this like to be her? Imagine if how this appears is so incredibly erratic to an everyday person, to a viewer who's watching this. What must that have been like to be inside her? What must that have been like? Did she feel internally like a roller coaster? One of the things I want to take a moment and talk about is what the cause of that is, that kind of shifting emotion, the shifting affect that you could see in some of these interviews. So fast it shifted. What is the cause of that? What is the diagnosis psychologically that causes a person to do that? And you probably guessed this, that it's really often not just one diagnosis that causes a person to do that. In fact, a lot of times, for that degree of psychological complexity that really you see so clearly in these interviews, that kind of complexity is often really an indicator of multiple psychological diagnoses at work. And in fact, a really good comprehensive paper was done on this by Wade Meyers and colleagues. Wade Meyers was actually involved himself with evaluating Aileen Wuornos and determining that she was competent to stand trial. Now, Wade Meyers wrote this paper with colleagues, and one of those colleagues was actually Reed Malloy. And I can share that Reed Malloy actually did trainings for me in antisocial personality, in the psychopathy checklist, and is really one of the most brilliant trainers there is. In their study that they wrote about, they found that Aileen Wuornos met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. They also found that she had a psychopathic personality with severe psychopathic traits, as evidenced by a score of 32 on the Psychopathy Checklist Revised. That's really important because psychopathic personality can include multiple factors, things like superficial charm, pathological lying, and being conning or manipulative. Now, I want to come back for a moment to superficial charm. One of the things that I thought was the most striking in the documentary is some of the footage where Aileen Wuornos is getting ready to be interviewed, and she comes in the room and she's really almost laughing, and she appears happy, almost euphoric, so excited. And what I glean from this as she's getting ready to be interviewed is that she may have felt as if she was a star in that moment, as if she had this sense of importance, that she had something to say that the world was interested in. And one of the comments made about someone who met her is they said when she came into the room, she had the energy of a famous person. The energy of a famous person. I thought that was so striking because it brings me back to one of those factors on the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, which is superficial charm. Walking into the room as if you just light it up because you are so inherently fascinating and interesting. But what a false sense of importance that she may have felt because she was there being interviewed for murders, for murders. And so it goes to show you this may have been a way that she felt some sort of power in her life, some sort of sense of importance, being a shot caller. But because she wasn't able in her life to get it any other way, she wasn't able to get a sense of true, meaningful power in her life in any other way other than resorting to this kind of violence. Now, we also can't deny the impact of any possible abuse that took place over the period of many years. What does abuse do to a person? And some of the details that she reported over time, having experienced herself, having been the victim of, what was the cost of that? What does that do to a person? These are all factors that this documentary does a really good question of asking. I hope some of these points have gotten you thinking, and there is a lot of information available about Aileen Wuornos if you're interested in abnormal psychology. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist with Couch Commentary.